Jake Brooks had been drifting through the outer rim for 3 weeks when his hyperdrive finally gave up. The salvage ship shuddered, groaned, and dropped out of faster-than-light travel near an abandoned trading station that hadn't seen activity in years. He ran diagnostics twice, hoping the readout was wrong, but the truth stared back at him in blinking red letters. The hyperdrive core was fried. Without spare parts or a repair dock, he was stuck. He checked his supplies next. 3 days of rations. Maybe 4 if he stretched them thin. The nearest inhabited system was 2 weeks away at sublight speed, which meant he'd be long dead before he reached help. Jake sat in the pilot's chair and laughed, because sometimes that's all you can do when the universe decides to kick you while you're down. The trading station loomed outside his viewport like a metal corpse floating in the black. It had been a bustling hub once, back when this sector still had trade routes worth protecting. Now it was just debris and memories. Jake suited up and crossed over, hoping to find something useful in the wreckage. Spare parts, a working comm array, maybe even forgotten supplies. Anything that might give him a chance. The station's interior was dark and cold. His helmet lights cut through the darkness as he moved through corridors lined with broken storefronts and shattered windows. He found plenty of junk but nothing useful. After 2 hours of searching, he was about to head back when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong in a dead station. Crying. Jake followed the sound to what used to be a cargo bay. Among the scattered crates and twisted metal, he found her. A child, no more than 7 or 8 by human standards, huddled against a wall. But she wasn't human. Her skin looked like living crystal, catching his helmet lights and refracting them into rainbow patterns across the walls. Sections of her body were cracked, leaking a fluid that glowed faint blue in the darkness. She was badly hurt. The universal translator on his suit struggled with her language, spitting out fragments that didn't quite make sense. But Jake didn't need a translator to understand fear. He'd seen that look before, in war zones and disaster sites. This kid was terrified and alone. He knelt slowly, keeping his movements gentle. She flinched away, pressing harder against the wall. Jake raised his hands to show he meant no harm, then carefully removed his helmet so she could see his face. The station had atmosphere, thin and stale but breathable. He smiled at her, the kind of smile you give to scared animals and lost children. "Hey there," he said softly. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." She stared at him with eyes that had too many facets, like looking into cut gemstones. Taz tracked down her crystalline cheeks. Jake's translator finally caught a few words. Lost. Scared. Alone. Ship gone. He understood enough. Pirates operated in this sector, hitting transports and leaving survivors to die in the void. This kid had been left behind, probably assumed dead in the attack. Jake looked at her injuries and wondered how she'd survived this long. He pulled his medkit from his belt and approached slowly. She didn't run, which he took as a good sign. The wounds were bad, cracks in her crystalline plating that went deep. He had no idea about her species biology, but he cleaned what he could and applied synthetic skin patches, hoping they'd at least seal the injuries. She whimpered during the treatment but didn't pull away. When he finished, Jake sat back and pulled a protein bar from his pack. He had 6 left. 6 bars between him and starvation. He looked at the crying alien child, then broke the bar in half and offered her a piece. She took it hesitantly, sniffed it, then ate. Her expression shifted, something that might have been surprise or relief. Jake ate his half slowly, making it last. Over the next hour, he learned her name through the translator's improving accuracy. Kira. She'd been traveling with her family when pirates attacked their transport. She'd hidden in an escape pod that malfunctioned and crashed here. She'd been alone for days, hurt and terrified, waiting to die. Jake's ship was damaged and his supplies were critically low, but he couldn't leave her. Not like this. He fashioned a shelter in a section of the station that still had heat, using emergency blankets and cargo tops. He gave her his jacket when she shivered. For 2 days, he stayed with her, sharing his dwindling rations and telling her stories she probably didn't understand. He talked about Earth, about oceans and mountains and cities full of people. He made her laugh once, demonstrating how humans dance, moving awkwardly in the low gravity. On the 3rd day, his food ran out. Jake felt the hollow ache of real hunger settling in, but Kira seemed stronger. The med patches had worked, and she was moving around more. He figured he'd bought her maybe another day or 2. Enough time for someone to find them, maybe. That's when the dreadnought arrived. Jake saw it through the station's viewport, a massive vessel that blotted out the stars. It was like nothing he'd ever seen, all golden metal and impossible angles. Smaller ships poured from its bays, heading straight for the station. Jake pulled Kira close as the sounds of forced entry echoed through the corridors. Warriors stormed into the cargo bay, 7 feet tall and armored in golden plating that matched their crystalline skin. They carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. Their eyes locked onto Kira, then shifted to Jake. He understood immediately. These were her people. And they thought he'd taken her. Jake stood slowly and stepped between Kira and the warriors, hands raised high. His throat was dry and his heart hammered, but he kept his voice steady. "She's safe," he said. "I kept her safe." The warriors advanced, weapons raised. Kira suddenly broke from behind him and ran forward, grabbing Jake's leg and refusing to let go. She shouted something in her language, her voice high and desperate. The warriors hesitated. More figures entered the bay, officers by their bearing. One approached, tall and regal, with crystalline formations on her head like a crown. She spoke, and the translator finally rendered it clearly. "You are the human who sheltered the princess." Jake blinked. Princess. Of course she was. Because his luck couldn't possibly get any worse. "I just helped a kid who needed help," he said. The officer stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she gestured, and the warriors lowered their weapons. Kira still clung to Jake's leg, crying now with relief instead of fear. As they led him toward the dreadnought, Jake wondered what he'd gotten himself into. He'd given his last meal to a lost child, not knowing she was royalty. Not knowing her empire was the most feared power in the galaxy. Not knowing that simple act of kindness would change everything. The dreadnought's interior made Jake feel like an insect crawling through a jewel box. Everything gleamed with crystalline surfaces that caught and scattered light in ways that hurt his eyes. The corridors stretched impossibly high, built for beings much larger than humans. Guards flanked him on both sides, their golden armor reflecting his nervous face back at him a dozen times over. They hadn't restrained him, which Jake took as either a good sign or a very bad one. Kira walked beside him, her small hand gripping his fingers tightly. She hadn't let go since they left the station. Every time the guards tried to separate them, she'd start crying again, and they'd back off with what Jake could only describe as uncomfortable shuffling. The audience chamber hit him like a physical force. It was massive, easily the size of a football stadium, with a ceiling that disappeared into golden light. Thousands of crystalline beings filled tiered platforms on either side, their bodies refracting light until the whole room seemed to pulse with rainbow fire. Their attention focused on Jake like a spotlight, and he suddenly understood what it felt like to be a mouse in a room full of cats. At the far end, on a throne that looked carved from a single impossible diamond, sat the Empress. She was ancient. Jake knew that the way you know things when you look at mountains or oceans, something that spoke of age beyond human comprehension. Her crystalline body held colors that shifted and changed, patterns that seemed to move beneath her surface like slow-motion fireworks. Her eyes, multifaceted and deep, fixed on Jake with an intensity that made his knees weak. The officer who'd collected him from the station knelt before the throne. She spoke in their language, rapid and formal. Jake's translator worked overtime, feeding him fragments. Princess recovered. Human salvager. 3 days. Shared provisions. Protected her. The Empress rose, and the entire chamber fell silent. When she spoke, her voice resonated through Jake's chest like standing too close to a speaker at a concert. "Jake Brooks of Earth," the translator rendered her words. "You have done something that requires explanation." Jake swallowed hard. "I helped a kid who was hurt and scared. That's all." A ripple passed through the assembled crowd, thousands of crystalline beings shifting with what might have been surprise or confusion. The Empress descended from her throne, each step deliberate. She moved closer until she towered over him, easily 8 feet tall. "You shared your final provisions with Princess Kira," she said. "You possessed 6 ration units. You gave her 3, knowing you would not survive the wait for rescue." Jake shrugged, trying to hide how terrified he was. She was a kid. Kids don't deserve to starve. "She is Velkari," the Empress said, and something in her tone suggested this should mean something important. "We have conquered 4 to 7 systems. We have destroyed fleets that opposed us. Your species classification under Galactic Council law is Category 4, limited spaceflight capability, minimal threat assessment. By any logical calculation, her life held more value than yours." "I don't do math on whether kids deserve to eat," Jake said, then immediately worried he'd just signed his death warrant. The Empress stared at him. The silence stretched so long Jake could hear his own heartbeat. Then something changed in her expression, something he couldn't quite read. "Princess Kira is 3rd in succession to the Eternal Throne," the Empress said. "When the attack occurred, her two elder siblings moved to consolidate power, believing her dead. Your actions prevented a succession war that would have consumed billions of lives across multiple systems. You have saved not one life, but countless millions. Jake blinked. I didn't know any of that. I just saw a scared kid. Jake swallowed hard. I helped a kid who was hurt and scared. That's all. A ripple passed through the assembled crowd, thousands of crystalline beings shifting with what might have been surprise or confusion. The Empress descended from her throne, each step deliberate. She moved closer until she towered over him, easily 8 feet tall. You shared your final provisions with Princess Kira, she said. You possessed 6 ration units. You gave her 3, knowing you would not survive the wait for rescue. Jake shrugged, trying to hide how terrified he was. She was a kid. Kids don't deserve to starve. She is Valkyrie, the Empress said, and something in her tone suggested this should mean something important. We have conquered 4 to 7 systems. We have destroyed fleets that opposed us. Your species classification under Galactic Council law is Category 4, limited spaceflight capability, minimal threat assessment. By any logical calculation, her life held more value than yours. I don't do math on whether kids deserve to eat, Jake said, then immediately worried he'd just signed his death warrant. The Empress stared at him. The silence stretched so long Jake could hear his own heartbeat. Then something changed in her expression, something he couldn't quite read. Princess Kira is third in succession to the Eternal Throne, the Empress said. When the attack occurred, her 2 elder siblings moved to consolidate power, believing her dead. Your actions prevented a succession war that would have consumed billions of lives across multiple systems. You have saved not one life, but countless millions. Jake blinked. I didn't know any of that. I just saw a scared kid. That is precisely what makes your action significant. The Empress gestured, and an attendant approached carrying a cushion. On it lay documents covered in script Jake couldn't read, along with data chips and what looked like deeds to property. The Valkyrie Eternal Empire recognizes debts of life preservation as sacred and binding. We offer you the standard compensation, governance of 3 colony worlds, a fleet commission, wealth sufficient for 10 human lifetimes, and a seat on the Imperial Council. Jake stared at the cushion like it might bite him. I don't want any of that. Another ripple through the crowd, stronger this time. The Empress tilted her head. Clarify. I'm a salvage operator. I fix broken ships and sell scrap metal. I don't know anything about governing worlds or commanding fleets. I'd be terrible at it. Jake ran a hand through his hair. Look, I appreciate the offer, really. It's incredibly generous. But all I want is my ship repaired so I can get back to work. The Empress stood motionless for so long Jake wondered if he'd broken her. Then she spoke rapidly to her attendants in untranslate Valkyrie. The crowd buzzed with what sounded like heated debate. Kira tugged on Jake's hand, looking up at him with those gemstone eyes. You really don't want the pretty worlds, her small voice came through the translator. I like my ship, Jake said honestly. It's small and cramped and the life support makes weird noises, but it's mine. I wouldn't know what to do with a world. Kira seemed to consider this, then hugged his leg again. The Empress finally turned back to him. In 10,000 years of Imperial history, no one has ever refused compensation for a life debt. Your species confuses us, Jake Brooks. You act against self-interest. You refuse logical benefits. You make decisions based on concepts we struggle to quantify. We call it being decent, Jake said. We have no equivalent word in Valkyrie. The Empress made a gesture, and attendants hurried forward. Your vessel will be repaired and upgraded with Imperial technology. You will also receive this. She held out a small crystal, perfectly clear, no bigger than a coin. This is a mark of protection under the Eternal Throne. While you carry it, you are considered an honored guest of the Empire. No Valkyrie vessel will threaten you. No Imperial subject will harm you. This token is recognized across 112 systems. Jake took the crystal carefully. It was warm in his palm, pulsing with a faint inner light. Thank you. That's more than generous. It is insufficient, the Empress said flatly. But it is what you will accept. The debt remains unpaid, Jake Brooks. The Valkyrie do not forget. 2 days later, Jake's ship was returned to him. The repairs went beyond fixing the hyperdrive. The whole vessel had been upgraded with technology he didn't understand, systems that would take him months to learn. As he prepared to depart, Kira came to see him off. She wore formal robes now, looking like the princess she was, but her eyes were still sad. Will you come back? She asked. Maybe someday, Jake said, kneeling to her level. You stay safe, okay? Learn lots of stuff. Grow up strong. She hugged him fiercely, then ran back to her attendants before she started crying again. As Jake's ship pulled away from the dreadnought, he looked at the crystal token sitting on his console. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't really over. The Empress had said the debt remained unpaid, and something in her tone suggested the Valkyrie took such things very seriously. But that was a problem for future Jake. Present Jake just wanted to get back to the Outer Rim and find some salvage that would actually pay the bills. He had no idea that the small crystal in his possession was about to become the most important object in the galaxy. 10 years changed a lot of things, but it didn't change Jake Brooks. He still ran salvage operations in the Outer Rim, still flew the same beat-up ship despite all the fancy Valkyrie upgrades he barely understood how to use. The crystal token sat in a small box near his bunk, gathering dust. He'd almost forgotten about it. What had changed was his crew. Jake's salvage and repair had grown from a one-man operation to a team of 7. He'd picked up misfits and outcasts along the way, people the galaxy had chewed up and spit out. There was Tommy, a former colony kid whose settlement got abandoned by the corporation that funded it. Rita had been a combat medic who got discharged for refusing an illegal order. Old Vincent claimed he used to be a professor before his university got bombed in some war Jake had never heard of. Jake treated them fair, split the profits evenly, and never asked questions about their past that they didn't want to answer. In the cutthroat world of Outer Rim salvage, where most operators worked their crews half to death for scraps, that made Jake Brooks unusual. Some said he was soft. Others said he was stupid. But his crew was loyal, and that counted for something. They were 3 days into surveying a debris field when Rita picked up the signature. A derelict ship, old design, power core completely dead. It had been drifting for maybe 50 years, long enough that every salvager in the sector had passed it by as worthless. But Rita's sensors caught something interesting. Beneath all the standard cargo, there were compartments that didn't match the ship's original design. Could be smuggler modifications, Tommy said, studying the readouts. Hidden holds, maybe contraband. Or could be nothing, Jake said, but he was already plotting an intercept course. Nothing usually turned into something interesting in the salvage business. They suited up and cut their way inside. The derelict was a tomb, silent and frozen, with bodies still strapped into stations where they'd died decades ago. Jake's crew moved through respectfully, checking each compartment. Standard cargo, personal effects, nothing valuable. They were about to give up when Vincent found the sealed chamber. It took 2 hours to cut through the reinforced door. When it finally opened, Jake understood why someone had gone to so much trouble to hide this room. Inside were artifacts, carefully preserved in stasis containers. Pre-uplift human technology, from before humanity had joined the galactic community. Jake recognized some of it from history files, early spacecraft components, primitive computers, cultural relics from old Earth. This stuff belongs in a museum, Rita whispered, her voice full of awe. This stuff is worth a fortune to collectors, Tommy corrected. Black market would pay millions. Jake was about to respond when the proximity alarm screamed. 3 ships had just dropped out of hyperspace, surrounding them. Big ships, military grade, with weapons already powering up. The hull identification marked them as Draven collective vessels. The Draven were bad news. They'd been expanding aggressively for the past 5 years, conquering border systems and enslaving populations they considered inferior. Humans ranked pretty low on their list of respected species, somewhere between livestock and particularly annoying insects. A transmission crackled through. Human vessel, you are in possession of prohibited materials. Surrender the artifacts and your crew for processing. Jake's jaw tightened. Processing was Draven code for interrogation, forced labor, and usually execution. These artifacts are human property. We're taking them home. Humanity has no claim to pre-uplift materials under galactic salvage law, the Draven commander responded. Such items are considered dangerous remnants and must be destroyed. Surrender or be fired upon. Jake looked at his crew. Rita's hand hovered near the weapons controls, but they all knew the truth. His salvage ship, even with Valkyrie upgrades he didn't fully understand, couldn't fight 3 Draven warships. They'd be vaporized in seconds. We surrender, Jake said quietly. The words tasted like ash. The Draven boarded with brutal efficiency. They ransacked the derelict, taking all the artifacts and cataloging them for destruction. Then they turned their attention to Jake's crew. Soldiers in heavy armor herded them together, weapons trained and ready. The Draven commander was a tall reptilian being with scales that shimmered like oil on water. He circled Jake's crew like a predator evaluating prey. "You are Jake Brooks, registered salvage operator, human, category 4 species." "That's me," Jake said. "You attempted to steal artifacts belonging to the Galactic Commons. This is a capital offense." The commander's mouth split into what might have been a smile, showing rows of needle teeth. "Normally, we would simply execute you here. But the Draven Collective has decided to make an example of human arrogance. You and your crew will be transported to the homeworld for public trial and execution. Let the galaxy see what happens to inferior species who reach beyond their station." Jake felt his crew tense around him. Tommy looked ready to fight despite the overwhelming odds. Rita's fists were clenched. Vincent just looked tired, like he'd seen this coming his whole life. They were taken to the Draven flagship in restraints. The cells were small and cold, designed to fit Draven physiology with no consideration for human comfort. Jake and his crew were separated into different sections. Through the walls, he could hear Tommy shouting, demanding to know what was happening. Rita's voice, calm and steady, telling him to save his strength. Jake sat on the metal bench in his cell and laughed bitterly. 10 years of keeping his head down, running honest salvage operations, treating people fairly. And this was where it got him. Scheduled for public execution to prove a point about humanity's place in the galaxy. He pulled the Velkari crystal from his pocket. He'd grabbed it before the Draven boarded, some instinct making him slip it into his jumpsuit. The token was warm in his palm, pulsing with that same faint inner light it had held for a decade. Jake had no idea if it even still worked. The Empress had said it offered protection, but that was 10 years ago. Would the Velkari even remember one random human they'd met once? He pressed the crystal, looking for some kind of activation mechanism. Nothing happened. He tried again, holding it longer. Still nothing. Jake slumped back against the wall. It had been a stupid hope anyway. What he didn't know was that the crystal had activated the moment he pressed it. A signal, encoded with Imperial Authority codes and carrying a priority that superseded nearly everything else in Velkari communications, had just been transmitted across half the galaxy. In the command center of the 3rd Imperial Fleet, stationed 3 systems away, an alert began to flash. A junior officer stared at his console in confusion, then growing alarm. He summoned his superior. She summoned hers. Within 5 minutes, the alert reached the fleet's commander. Princess Kira, now 23 years old and standing 7 feet tall in full battle armor, stared at the readout. Her crystalline body had darkened over the years, taking on deeper colors that marked her as a warrior of the highest rank. She commanded 15 capital ships and had earned a reputation as one of the Empire's most brilliant tacticians. But when she saw Jake Brooks' name on that alert, when she saw the token's activation after 10 years of silence, something shifted in her expression. The cold tactical mind that had won a dozen battles suddenly gave way to something else. Something that remembered being a scared child in a dark station, and a soft voice telling her story she didn't understand. "Locate that signal's origin," she ordered, her voice cutting through the command center. "I want full battle deployment in 30 minutes. And someone wake the Empress. Tell her the human's token has been activated." In his cell, Jake Brooks had no idea that he'd just triggered the largest military mobilization the Velkari Empire had executed in 5 years. He sat alone in the darkness, clutching a crystal token, and waited for an execution he was certain would come. He had no idea that help was already on its way. And when it arrived, the galaxy was going to learn something important about debts, honor, and what happens when you threaten someone under the protection of the Eternal Throne. Retry SF. The Draven homeworld was a fortress planet, ringed with defense stations and patrolled by hundreds of warships. It had never fallen to invasion, never been successfully blockaded, and the Draven considered it completely impregnable. Their arrogance wasn't entirely unfounded. The defense grid could vaporize entire fleets, and their standing military numbered in the millions. On the planet's surface, in the capital city's central plaza, workers were constructing execution platforms. The trial of Jake Brooks and his crew was scheduled for the following day. Millions of Draven citizens would attend in person, while billions more across their territory would watch the broadcast. The message was simple: humanity and other lesser species needed to know their place. Jake watched the construction from his cell window. The platforms were elaborate, designed for spectacle. The Draven wanted this execution to be memorable. In the cell beside him, he could hear Rita breathing steadily, staying calm like she'd been trained. Tommy had finally stopped shouting hours ago. Vincent was probably praying, though Jake wasn't sure what gods a man prayed to when he was this far from home. "I'm sorry," Jake said through the wall, knowing his crew could hear him. I should have run when we had the chance. We made the choice together, boss, Rita's voice came back. No regrets. Jake pressed his forehead against the cold metal. The crystal token was back in his pocket, useless. Whatever magic it once held had faded with time, if it had ever been real at all. He'd been a fool to think otherwise. What Jake didn't know was that 3 systems away, space itself was tearing open. Hyperspace portals materialized in the void, each one large enough to swallow a moon. Through them came the Velkari Third Imperial Fleet, 15 capital ships that made Draven dreadnoughts look like children's toys. Each vessel gleamed with golden metal, covered in crystalline surfaces that caught and reflected starlight until they blazed like newborn suns. But they weren't alone. Behind them came more portals. The 5th Fleet. The 7th. The 9th. Within an hour, 3 full Velkari battle fleets had assembled at the edge of the system, over 40 capital ships and hundreds of support vessels. It was the largest military force the Velkari had deployed in a decade. And at the center of the formation, escorted by a full honor guard, came the Empress's personal flagship. On the Draven homeworld, alarms began screaming. Defense stations powered up to full combat readiness. Every warship in the system scrambled to form defensive positions. In the military command center, generals stared at tactical displays showing impossible numbers. Confirm those readings, the Supreme Commander ordered, his scales rippling with agitation. Confirmed, sir. 43 Velkari capital ships, current position holding at system edge. They are not advancing, but weapons are charged and ready. The Supreme Commander felt something he hadn't experienced in decades, fear. The Draven Collective was powerful, but the Velkari Empire was ancient and vast beyond comprehension. A full-scale war between them would devastate both civilizations, but the Draven would absolutely lose. Open a channel, he ordered. Demand to know their intentions. The view screen activated, showing Princess Kira standing on her command deck. She wore full ceremonial battle armor, every inch of her 7-foot frame radiating barely contained violence. Behind her, the Empress sat on a throne that had been transported from her flagship, a gesture of such significance that the Draven commander's throat went dry. This is Supreme Commander Vesh of the Draven Collective, he began, trying to keep his voice steady. Your presence in our territory is an act of aggression. Explain yourself or face. You hold Jake Brooks, Kira interrupted, her voice cutting through his words like a blade. Human salvage operator, along with his crew of 6. You will release them immediately, unharmed and with all their possessions returned. Vesh blinked, confused. The human criminals are scheduled for execution following their trial for. There will be no trial. There will be no execution. Kira's eyes blazed with inner light. Jake Brooks carries a token of protection from the Eternal Throne. He is under Imperial protection, and has been for 10 years. By detaining him, you have committed an act of war against the Velkari Empire. Vesh felt his blood run cold. We had no knowledge of any Imperial protection. The human was in possession of prohibited. I do not care about your laws or your protocols. Kira leaned forward, and every ship in the Velkari fleet shifted position in perfect synchronization, weapons tracking to new targets. You have 1 hour to deliver Jake Brooks and his crew to us, unharmed. If you fail to comply, your defense stations will be destroyed. If you resist, your fleet will be vaporized. If you continue to resist, your cities will burn. The Empress rose from her throne, her ancient presence filling the screen. The Draven Collective has exactly 60 minutes to demonstrate wisdom. Choose correctly. The transmission ended. In the command center, chaos erupted. Junior officers shouted reports about weapons locks and targeting solutions. Generals argued about honor and sovereignty. But Vesh knew the truth. They couldn't win this fight. The Velkari had mobilized 3 full fleets for 1 human. That level of commitment meant they would see this through to the end, no matter the cost. Release the human prisoners, Vesh ordered quietly. Sir, the trial is scheduled for. Release them. Vesh roared. And someone find me everything we have on this Jake Brooks. I want to know why the Velkari Empire is willing to start a war for a Category 4 salvager. 30 minutes later, Jake and his crew were pulled from their cells. They were still in restraints, still bruised from rough handling during capture. Guards marched them through corridors at weapon point. Jake expected to be taken to the execution platforms early, maybe to make an example before the scheduled time. Instead, they were brought to a hangar bay where a Velkari shuttle waited, its golden hull seeming to glow in the harsh artificial light. The Draven guards removed their restraints with shaking hands, then backed away quickly. "What's happening?" Tommy whispered. "I have no idea," Jake admitted. The shuttle's ramp lowered, and a figure descended. Jake's breath caught. It was Kira, though it took him a moment to recognize her. She'd been a small child the last time he'd seen her. Now she stood taller than him, her crystalline body covered in armor that looked like it had been forged from starlight and war. She walked straight to Jake, her footsteps echoing in the silent hangar. Every Draven guard had their weapons lowered, none daring to interfere. Kira stopped in front of him, her multifaceted eyes studying his face. "You kept the token," she said softly. "Yeah," Jake managed. "Wasn't sure it still worked." "A debt to the Eternal Throne does not expire with time, Jake Brooks. It compounds. It grows stronger." Kira's voice carried across the hangar. "You gave everything you had to save a child you didn't know. The Velkhari do not forget such debts." Then, to Jake's absolute shock, she knelt before him. Not a slight bow, but a full kneel, her forehead touching the deck in what he remembered as the highest gesture of respect in Velkhari culture. Behind her, every Velkhari warrior on the shuttle knelt in unison. Through the hangar's viewports, Jake could see the massive fleet in orbit. On every ship, thousands of crystalline warriors performed the same gesture, a synchronized display visible across the entire system. The Third Imperial Fleet, one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy, knelt before a human salvager who'd once shared his last meal with a scared little girl. Jake looked at his crew, all of them staring in disbelief. Rita's mouth hung open. Tommy looked like he might pass out. Vincent was definitely praying now. "I don't understand," Jake said quietly. "I just did what anyone would do." Kira rose, and there were tears tracking down her crystalline cheeks, glowing faintly in the dim light. "No, Jake Brooks. You did what only you would do. And the Empire has come to repay its debt." The shuttle ride to the Velkhari flagship felt surreal. Jake sat across from Princess Kira, still trying to process what had just happened. His crew huddled together near the back, whispering nervously. Through the viewport, the Golden Fleet spread out like a protective wall between them and the Draven homeworld. 10 years, Jake said finally, breaking the silence. "You mobilized 3 fleets because I pressed a button on a crystal after 10 years. Kira's expression was difficult to read, but something in it seemed almost amused. "The token is linked directly to Imperial security networks. When it activated, every ship in the Third Fleet received the alert within seconds. I was in the middle of a tactical briefing when your name appeared on my console. And you just dropped everything and came?" "Of course." Kira tilted her head, as if confused by the question. "You saved my life when you had every reason not to. You gave me your food when doing so meant your death. In Velkhari culture, such debts are absolute. They transcend time, politics, even logic." Jake rubbed his face, exhausted. "I didn't save you expecting some kind of eternal favor. I just couldn't leave a kid to die alone." "That is precisely why the debt is so profound," Kira said. "You acted without expectation of reward. In a galaxy where every interaction is a transaction, where species calculate the value of every decision, you simply chose kindness. The Velkhari have studied your species extensively over the past decade. That quality appears to be uniquely human." The flagship's hangar was even more impressive than Jake remembered. The Empress waited there personally, surrounded by an honor guard that could probably conquer a planet by themselves. When Jake's crew filed out of the shuttle, they all stopped dead at the sight. The Empress approached, and Jake's crew instinctively moved behind him, as if a human salvager could somehow protect them from an entity that had ruled for centuries. The Empress stopped in front of Jake, studying him with those ancient, multifaceted eyes. "Jake Brooks," she said, her voice resonating through the hangar. 10 years ago, you refused our gifts. You asked only for your ship to be repaired. Do you remember?" "Yes, Jake said, defaulting to politeness when he had no idea what else to do. "At the time, my advisors considered you foolish. They believed you failed to understand the value of what was offered. But I have had 10 years to observe your species, and I have come to a different conclusion." The Empress gestured, and holographic displays flickered to life around them. "The Velkhari Empire spans 112 systems. We have existed for 10,000 years. In all that time, across all the species we have encountered, none have confused us as much as humanity." The displays showed human colonies, trade stations, settlements scattered across the outer rim. Jake recognized some of them, places he'd visited during salvage runs. "Humans are weak by galactic standards," the Empress continued. "Your technology is primitive. Your lifespans are brief. Your bodies are fragile. By every logical measure, you should be irrelevant. Yet wherever humans establish themselves, they create something we cannot quantify. Communities. Bonds. They help each other without calculation of benefit. We call it being decent, Jake said, echoing his words from a decade ago. Yes. And we still have no equivalent word in Valkyrie. The Empress moved closer. Princess Kira has changed in the 10 years since you saved her. She shows mercy when tactics suggest ruthlessness. She remembers the names of subordinates, something no other Valkyrie commander does. She negotiates before destroying. The Imperial Court calls her weak, but her fleets have won every engagement with fewer casualties than any commander in our history. Jake glanced at Kira, who looked uncomfortable with the praise. She learned these things from you, the Empress said. From 2 days with a human who treated her as worthy of protection simply because she was a child in need. This is the quality that makes humanity dangerous, Jake Brooks. Not your weapons or your ships, but your inexplicable insistence on compassion even when it serves no tactical purpose. I don't think kindness needs a tactical purpose, Jake said. Precisely. The Empress smiled, an expression that transformed her alien features into something almost warm. Which is why the Valkyrie Empire is making you an offer. Not wealth or territory this time. Something different. She gestured again, and the displays changed to show ships, stations, trade routes. Your salvage operation will be placed under permanent Imperial protection. This is not negotiable. The decree has already been issued across all Imperial space. Any who threaten Jake Brooks' salvage and repair threaten the Eternal Throne itself. Jake's crew gasped. Tommy grabbed Jake's shoulder, squeezing hard enough to bruise. But we also offer partnership, the Empress continued. The Valkyrie Empire wishes to learn from humanity. Your species possesses something our calculations cannot replicate. We want to understand it. In exchange for your agreement to meet with our cultural observers periodically, to help us comprehend this decency you speak of, we will provide resources to expand your operation. Hire more crew. Help more people. Whatever you need. Jake stared at her. You want to pay me to teach you how to be nice to people. We want to learn why being nice to people matters when it contradicts tactical advantage, the Empress corrected. Our empire is vast, but it is sterile. We conquer efficiently, but we do not build communities. We calculate loyalty, but we do not inspire it. You have shown us that there is value in what we dismissed as weakness. Jake looked at his crew. Rita nodded slowly. Tommy grinned. Vincent just shrugged, like this was somehow the least weird thing that had happened today. Okay, Jake said finally. But I've got conditions. Any species can work for me, no discrimination. Fair wages for everyone. And if the Empire wants to learn about decency, that means no more enslaving conquered populations or destroying colonies just because they resist. The Imperial Court erupted in shocked murmurs. Several advisors looked outraged. But the Empress raised a hand, silencing them. You negotiate from a position of no power whatsoever, yet make demands that would reshape Imperial policy, she observed. Fascinating. Very well. The Empire will review its treatment of conquered populations. We make no promises of complete change, but we will study human methods and consider alternatives to subjugation. That's a start, Jake said. As they walked back toward the shuttle, Kira accompanied them. At the ramp, she stopped Jake with a gentle hand on his arm. Thank you, she said quietly. Not just for saving me 10 years ago, but for teaching me that power and calculation aren't the only things that matter. My siblings rule through fear and logic. I want to try something different. I want to build an empire worth protecting, not just an empire that protects itself. Jake smiled. You were always going to figure that out. You're smart, and you've got a good heart. I just gave you a protein bar and some bad jokes. You gave me hope when I had none, Kira corrected. You showed me that the universe could be kind. That's worth more than any tactical advantage. She pressed something into his hand. A new crystal token, but this one was different. Instead of clear, it held colors that swirled and shifted like a tiny galaxy contained in crystal. This is a personal token, she explained. Connected directly to me. If you ever need anything, anything at all, you press it and I will come. Not the fleet, not the empire. Me. That's a promise, Jake Brooks. Jake pocketed the crystal carefully. Try not to start any wars on my account, okay? I make no such promises, Kira said, but she was smiling. The shuttle carried them back to Jake's ship, which the Valkyrie had recovered from the Draven and repaired. As they approached it, Jake saw that the hull had been decorated with Imperial symbols, marking it as protected. His beat-up salvage vessel now carried the same protections as an Imperial flagship. "This is insane," Tommy said, staring at the modifications. "Boss, do you realize what just happened? We're untouchable now. We could salvage anywhere, take any job." "We could," Jake agreed. "Or we could just keep doing what we've been doing. Helping people who need help. Treating folks fairly. Running an honest operation." Rita laughed. "You just became the most protected human in the galaxy, and you want to keep scrapping junk in the Outer Rim." "It's what I'm good at," Jake said with a shrug. As they boarded the ship and prepared for departure, Jake looked back at the Valkyrie fleet one last time. The massive vessels hung in space like golden monuments to power and ancient empire. But somewhere in that fleet was a young woman who'd been a scared child once, and who'd learned that kindness mattered more than conquest. Maybe the galaxy was changing. Maybe it was learning that there was more than one way to build something that lasted. Or maybe Jake Brooks was just a salvager who'd gotten incredibly lucky by being decent to a kid who needed help. Either way, he had a crew to take care of and work to do. The rest would sort itself out. As the ship jumped to hyperspace, heading back toward the Outer Rim, Jake pulled out both crystal tokens and looked at them. One had sat unused for 10 years. The other represented a promise from one of the galaxy's most powerful warriors. He put them both in the drawer with his spare tools. Just in case. But hopefully, he'd never need to use them again. Jake Brooks preferred a quiet life, honest work, and crew he could trust. The galaxy had other plans, but for now, that was enough.